Secondly, we're now in a situation where we're going to face more crises and more frequent crises, and therefore NATO has got to be able to raise its game in the sense of being able to make the transition from peace to war through a crisis period, if necessary, much more quickly. And that means more exercises for NATO ambassadors, for NATO decision makers, scenario-driven exercises, tabletop exercises. It's not just the military that have to train as they fight. The diplomats have to learn also to train as they fight as well. Number three, you need a much broader spectrum of capabilities because we need now to fight in cyberspace. Didn't have to do that before. We need to have to fight in the information propaganda space. Again, something that we didn't necessarily have to do before either. We need to look at how, for example, terrorist organizations could exploit new technologies like artificial intelligence or bioengineering, just like they're already acquiring ballistic and chemical weapons. So we need to deal with a world where, look at cyberspace, the individual or the small group now has access to knowledge, to our vulnerabilities, to power, to capabilities that 100 years ago only a massive state with lots and lots of resources would be able to have. I call this the democratization of insecurity. In other words, nowadays anybody could destabilize anything. Like cyber can allow anybody to attack anything from anywhere at any time of the day with a very, very tiny investment of resources.
So in light of what you've outlined here, the complexity of the tasks and the threats, wouldn't you in fact be telling our decision makers that NATO is more relevant today than arguably at any point since the end of the Cold War? That we are facing these new tasks. Let me ask you flat out, what would you advise or say to President Trump as he enters into office about NATO's value going forward?
Well, normally, Andrew, you wouldn't sort of marry somebody on the basis of her portrait or her reputation, right? You'd get to know her first before you decide whether you want to be married or not. So the first thing I'd hope is that President Trump, because today he's inaugurated, so he's no longer president-elect, would first of all come over and find out a little bit about NATO first. For example, he says that NATO needs to do more on terrorism. We're not doing anything on terrorism. Well, but surely he realizes that not only have thousands of Americans died in Afghanistan fighting Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, but thousands of Europeans as well. And that the Allies have been with the United States in Iraq, we've been together now today doing defence capacity building across the Middle East and so on. So first of all, look at what's really happening. Sometimes we may not call it counter-terrorism. We may give it another fancy name like defence capacity building or projecting stability. But we are doing a lot. One of your famous Supreme Court judges, Oliver Wendell Holmes, said everybody's entitled to his own opinion, but everybody's not entitled to his own facts. So let's get the facts on the table. But having said that, I also acknowledge from the NATO side, we've got to do a better job of explaining ourselves in the United States. That's the first thing. Secondly, Europe also helps the United States. This is not a one-way street. When the United States wants to do something in the world, where do the allies come from? I mean, do the Russians put troops into American operations? Do the Chinese put troops into American operations? Do they put their soldiers on the line? Only the Europeans do this. Thirdly, look at all the things that the Europeans are doing for stability, which the United States doesn't have to do. The French are in Mali. Great. So the Americans don't have to be in Mali. The Europeans are subsidizing UN peacekeeping much more than the United States. And we could carry on in this vein. So, it's very easy to simplify in this complex world, but let's get the facts on the table first. And I think ultimately the president has to ask if alliances of convenience which fold very quickly, have the same value as the kind of permanent, structured relations based on common values which the NATO alliance offers the United States.
You used the metaphor of dating or courtship or getting to know one another when you spoke of President Trump and NATO. What would be the best format for that? A summit? private meetings, expert meetings? What would you recommend?
Well, I am a great believer that before we have a big public event like a summit, although that will come because I imagine that President Trump will come over to Europe, Brussels, to meet the allies sooner or later, just like the President, for example, engages with the European Union as well as NATO, as well as individual allies. But my sense, given what we've heard on the campaign trail, given that we've got a new administration with lots of new faces coming in, some of whom are more familiar with NATO than others, that a period of quiet diplomacy whereby we have some meetings with the key officials, with the President, to talk about things, to get a better sense of where President Trump would like NATO to go. But also, as I said, to explain to the President that, Mr. President, you may not realize this, but NATO's already doing this. And let's therefore look at the things that should be done rather than the things that are being done already. And so that when a summit does happen, it is what a NATO summit should be, what the Warsaw Summit was last July, which is a display of unity and resolve. I mean, Benjamin Franklin was fond of saying that we either hang together or we hang separately. And in this world where the economic resources, the populations of the United States and Europe vis-a-vis the rest of the world, our comparative power instruments vis-a-vis the rest of the world are declining all the time. Our mastery of technology, monopoly of technology, is not what it used to be. We really have to ask ourselves if this is the time to start sort of trying to go it alone. To my mind, this is definitely the time for coming closer together.
Jamie, I have to ask you this. This is not the first time you've been at the Marshall Center. When you look at us, we're a German-American partnership. We're committed to being here in the region, working with allies and partners. How do you see our role in this next cycle of NATO's engagement? What should our role be in your view?
Well, I think that the first thing, based on what I saw today, is bringing in the decision makers, getting them to sort of leave the comfort zone of their capitals and the day-to-day political grind, and coming down here, particularly in this glorious setting of the Alps, where you can start taking a long-term strategic view of things, and getting a serious background in the various issues. But these people have to vote the defence budgets at the end of the day. They have to make the decisions. They're the people who have the immediate contact with their public opinion. They're the people who talk to the media. And basically, if our elites in this age of populism, of sort of angry direct democracy, if our elites don't understand what we're doing, then we're going to be in trouble. So I think the first thing is the training of elites. Now, I know that in the past, the Marshall Center concentrated very much on our partners. Many great contacts were made back in the 1990s when the Marshall Center started with the emerging military commanders and political elites in partner countries, building that network which has been so useful to us, for example, in Afghanistan or dealing with the Middle East. But our home front, to my mind, is the major strategic theatre of today. It's the cohesion of our own societies, the perception that Russia has that we're weak and can be manipulated, that we can be divided among ourselves. The fact that our publics now don't trust governments or institutions or the media or international organisations the way that they used to. So to my mind, I would hope that the Marshall Center, while not giving up the partnership role, would increasingly see that NATO's sort of, if you like, battle line today is behind the lines as much as, if not more, as it is in front of us, and would therefore really see, not just in terms of the German-American dialogue, which is so fundamental, but in main, what we can do to tie our own elites closer behind what NATO is doing, and can look at also a larger number of societal vulnerabilities. We've spoken about cyber today, we've spoken about propaganda, for instance, critical infrastructure protection, all of these kind of things. What we can do to make those more resilient and not just focus on how efficient our NATO tanks are against hypothetical adversary tanks. Because as we were saying a moment ago over lunch, my conviction is that what counts in winning today is the integrity of your operational environment behind the lines, and it's that which the adversary is trying to undermine without going to war all the time, like we have everyday cyber attacks, everyday propaganda campaigns, and to focus more on that resilience piece so that we ultimately are less of a target simply because we are less vulnerable.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and we're coming towards the end of our discussion here, combining the transnational and regional missions is just as vital today, if not more, for the Marshall Center and for the NATO alliance in terms of getting our own community in order, resilient and strong, if I'm understanding what your principal points here are.
Yes, and the fact that this is an organization which has been very much co-sponsored by Germany and the United States, but which represents an important American strategic footprint in Europe at the time when the transatlantic relationship sometimes, to many, doesn't seem as solid as it was, has this enormous symbolic value. Along with all of your 30-odd years now of experience of doing this kind of thing. So to give a short answer, if not you, who else?
Well, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for this vote of confidence. Our time has come to an end. Dr. Shea, thank you once again for sitting down with us and for answering a few questions. We're delighted to have you here. I hope you'll be back again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew.
All right. Thank you. For Marshall Center Perspectives, I'm Andrew Mikta, Dean of the College.